I'm Nobuyuki Shugo, and you're the hero everyone's talking about, Kirito. The guy in front of me smiled and said, I'm Kazuto Kirigaya. Nice to meet you. As we shook hands, I glanced over at Shuzu, who nodded slightly while rubbing his chin. Shugo chuckled and said, sorry about that. I know what happened in the SAO servers is a secret, but it's just too amazing not to talk about. This guy is like a son to me. Our families have been super close for years. Shugo turned to Shuzu and let go of my hand, saying I'd love to make everything official by the end of next month. Shuzu looked surprised and said, wait. Are you sure about this? You're still really young, there's plenty of time to figure out your life. But Shugo was determined. He told Shuzu that he'd had his heart set on this for years. I'd love to see Asuna wear that dress, while she's still so beautiful, someone said. Another person agreed. Yeah, it's time to make a tough choice. I listened to their conversation, but I had no idea what they were talking about. Then Shuzu turned to me, and said, I should get going. I'll catch you later, Kirigaya. He nodded quickly, and turned his big frame around, heading for the door. The door swung open, then shut again. Now only one person was left, a man named Shugo. He walked slowly around the foot of the bed and stopped on the other side. Then he did something that made my skin crawl. He picked up a strand of her hair and started rubbing it between his fingers, making a soft scratching sound. Shugo spoke in a gentle voice, but his words sent a chill down my spine. I heard you and Asuna were together in the game, he said, staring at her. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Yes, Shugo's eyes locked onto mine, and he added, that makes things complicated between us. He raised his head, his eyes boring into mine with an unnerving intensity. I totally misjudged this guy at first. His eyes were narrow and his pupils were small, which made him look pretty mean. When he smiled, the corners of his mouth went up, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was more like a sneaky grin that seemed to be hiding something bad. A shiver ran down my spine. You know what I was just talking about, he said with a smug grin. It's about me getting married to Asuna. I was totally shocked and couldn't say a word. What was he even talking about? It took a few seconds for his words to sink in, like a cold breeze on a winter day. Finally I found my voice, but it came out all shaky. You can't be serious. I trailed off. That's right, he said, sounding pretty pleased with himself. So, here's the thing. Asuna and I can't actually be married because she's not awake and can't agree to it. On paper, her family is just taking me in as a foster kid. But what's really crazy is that Asuna has never been a fan of mine. He gently ran his finger along her cheek. Her parents never seemed to notice how she felt about me though. I had a feeling that if marriage ever came up, she'd probably say no. And that's what makes this situation perfect for me. I hope she keeps sleeping for a bit longer. His finger was getting closer and closer to her lips. Stop it. I reacted fast and grabbed his hand, pulling it away from her face. My voice was shaking with anger. You're taking advantage of Asuna being in a coma, aren't you? I accused. Sugu just sneered and pulled his hand back. Advantage? No way. I'm doing what's perfectly legal, he said with a smirk. Kirigaya, do you know what happened to Argus, the company that made Sao? He asked. I heard they went out of business. I replied. Sugu nodded. That's right. They spent too much money making the game. And then they had to pay a ton of money to fix things after the big problem with SAO. It was so expensive that it bankrupted them. I was part of the team that took care of the SAO server. It was my job to make sure everything ran smoothly. Shugo walked around the bed and got right in my face, still smiling like he owned the place. This means Asuna's life is totally in my hands now, he said, his voice low and creepy. And don't I deserve something for taking care of her? He whispered this into my ear, and I knew exactly what he was getting at. He was using Asuna's helpless situation to get what he wanted. I was frozen in shock, but Shugo just kept talking. He dropped the smile and his voice turned cold. I don't know what kind of promises you made to each other in the game, he said, but I want you to stay away from the hospital. I gripped my fists tightly, feeling helpless. Stay away from the Yuki family. I was warned. Time seemed to slow down as I stood there, frozen. Then, Sugo backed off. A smile spreading across his face. His cheeks even dimpled like he was trying not to laugh. We're having a ceremony here at the hospital next month, he said. I'll send you an invitation, so you can join in on the fun. Time to go, so make the most of your last meeting. Hero, I really wished I had my swords right then. I would have used one to stab him in the heart, and the other to cut off his head. Suga seemed to know how angry I was, but he just patted me on the shoulder, and walked out of the room. The next thing I knew, I was home, but I didn't remember how I got there. I sat on my bed staring blankly at the wall. My mind kept going back to my marriage to Asuna, but it wasn't a happy thought. Now her whole life was under my control. I couldn't shake off the words that Suga had said. They just kept repeating in my head. Every time I heard them, I felt a surge of hatred burning inside me, like hot molten metal piercing through my heart. But then I wondered, was I just being too proud? Suga had been friends with Asuna's family for years, and basically he was already her fiancé. He had gained Shuzo Yuki's trust, and was a big deal at RCT. A long time ago it was decided that he would marry Asuna one day. But then I came along, just a kid she met in an online game. Maybe the anger I felt about losing her was just like a kid throwing a tantrum because someone took their favorite toy. To us the amazing floating castle Aincrad was the whole world. We thought our love would last forever. The things we said to each other, the promises we made, and all the amazing memories we created were like precious treasures in my mind. But reality was starting to wear them down. It was like someone was taking a rough stone and scratching away at those treasures, making them smaller and less shiny. Asuna had once smiled at me and said, "I want to be with you forever, Kirito," but now that smile was slowly disappearing. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Asuna," I whispered, feeling my heart ache. I felt completely helpless. Tears I'd been trying to hold back started falling, dripping down onto my clenched fists. Just then I heard Suguha's voice calling out from downstairs. "The bath is ready, big brother." She was talking to me through the door of my bedroom on the second floor, but I didn't answer. After coming home from the hospital that evening, I had gone straight to my room and hadn't come out for dinner. Suguha walked up to my door and put her hand on the doorknob. But she hesitated, unsure of what to do next. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open, worried that if he was sleeping alone he might get sick. The knob turned easily and clicked into place. As the door creaked open, she peeked inside. It was super dark, and at first she thought he must be fast asleep, but then a chill ran over her, making her shiver. A cold breeze wafted out, and she felt a sudden surge of concern. Kazuto must have forgotten to close the window. Suga slipped into the room, shaking her head. She shut the door and walked over to the window, on the south side of the room. But what she saw surprised her. Mikazu wasn't fast asleep like she thought he'd be. Instead, he was sitting on the edge of his bed, his head hanging down. Suga apologized. "Oh, sorry, I thought you were sleeping." Kazuto didn't say anything for a few moments. Then, in a rough and weak voice, he spoke up. "Can I just be alone for a while?" Suga looked at him with concern. "But it's so cold in here." She reached out and gently touched his arm. Brr, it was freezing. "Oh my gosh, you're turning into an ice cube," Suga exclaimed. "You need to warm up before you catch a cold. Come on, let's get you in the bath." Just then, she noticed the lights from outside shining through the window onto Kazuto's face. "What's wrong?" she asked, but he just grumbled, "Nothing." Suga wasn't convinced. Suddenly Kazuto covered his forehead with his hands, like he was trying to hide from her questioning gaze. He spoke up again, his voice harsh and mean. "I'm hopeless," he said. "I promised myself I wouldn't whine in front of you." Suga's instincts kicked in right away. She spoke softly and slowly. "Did something happen with Asuna?" His body froze. He squeezed out the words. "Asuna is going far, far away." Suguha was totally caught off guard. She didn't know what to do when she saw him like that. He was curled up, tears streaming down his face, like a little kid. It was a really shocking sight. Suga quickly closed the window and drew the curtains to make the room cozier. She even turned on the heater to warm things up. Then she sat down beside him on the bed. For a moment she just hesitated, not sure what to do next. But then she gently wrapped her arms around his cold body, trying to comfort him. Suga saw the stress melt away from him. She leaned in close and whispered, "Come on, don't give up. Keep fighting for the one you really love." It wasn't easy for her to say those words. When she heard herself say them out loud, it felt like her heart was going to break into a million pieces. The pain was almost too much to handle. Suga felt a pang in her heart, like something was waking up inside her. She realized just how much she really loved Kazuto. Right then, she couldn't keep pretending it wasn't true. Gently she leaned back and guided Kazuto onto the bed, pulling the covers over him. As the warmth wrapped around them, Shuga put her arm around his back again. She softly rubbed his back and soon his sobbing slowed down, replaced by the calm breaths of sleep. Shuga shut her eyes tight and tried to convince herself to let go. She needed to hide her feelings deep down, where no one could see them. The truth was hard to face. Kazuto's heart belonged to someone else, not her. A single tear rolled down her cheek and fell onto the bed sheets. But then something strange happened. Shuga felt herself drifting into a warm, cozy feeling. It was like that happy moment, just before you wake up when everything feels fuzzy and nice. Sunlight filtered through the trees, and gently touched my cheek. I leaned in to hug the person sleeping next to me. Her breathing was slow and steady, so I knew she was really out. I opened my eyes to take a peek. And suddenly I gasped. I caught myself just in time, swallowing the yelp that almost escaped. I jumped back, still lying on my back, and put some distance between us. I sat up with a jolt, and looked around frantically. But something was off. This wasn't the forest I always imagined, on the 22nd floor of Ankrad. I was actually in my own room, lying in my own bed. And I wasn't alone. I slowly pulled back the blanket, still trying to process what was happening. But I quickly covered myself back up, and shook my head, trying to wake myself up and clear the fog from my brain. I pulled back the cover again and was surprised by what I saw. Suga's short black hair and vivid eyebrows stood out. Even in her sleep, she was wearing her favorite pajamas and had her face buried in my pillow. I was totally confused. What was she doing in my bed? I tried to remember what had happened the night before. Bits and pieces started coming back to me. I recalled walking in the door after a long day at the hospital, feeling pretty down. Suga had been there for me, listening to me vent and trying to make me feel better. But how did she end up sleeping in my bed? I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was feeling super embarrassed. What's wrong with me? Am I a little kid or something? I thought to myself, but as I looked over at Suguo, she was fast asleep and totally clueless. She didn't need to be in my bed to make me feel better. Did she? It made me think of something that happened to me before. Back in Ikred, there was this one person I met on the 40th floor, a beast tamer. I couldn't help but think of Suguha when I looked at her. Just like before, she had fallen asleep in my bed, and I was just as unsure about what to do. But for some reason I felt a smile spread across my face. The worries about Asuna and Suga were still on my mind. But the sharp pain I'd been feeling had somehow faded away overnight. My memories of our time in Ikred were like precious treasures. Every happy moment and every sad one was special to me. These memories were real, and I couldn't deny them. I had promised Asuna that we would meet again in the real world. There had to be something I could do to make it happen. Just then I remembered Suga's last words before I fell asleep. Don't just give up, her words echoed in my mind. Yeah, you're right, I said out loud, leaning forward to gently poke Suga's cheek. Hey Suga, rise and shine, I said, trying to get my sister out of bed. She grumbled and tried to hide under the blanket. I had to take Dr. Steck measures. I pinched her cheek and pulled the blanket away. Come on, you're gonna miss your morning practice, I said. Suga slowly opened one eye, looking pretty groggy. Good morning, big brother, she mumbled, sitting up straight. She looked at me with a confused expression, then started scanning the room like she was trying to remember where she was. Suga's eyes went wide with surprise, and her cheeks turned bright red. I didn't, she stuttered, but no sound came out. Her face was red all the way to her ears. Suddenly she jumped up and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I scratched my head, wondering what had just happened. I got up and opened my window to let in some fresh air. The cold breeze felt great on my sleepy body. Just as I was getting ready to take a quick shower and change into some new clothes, I heard a beep from my desk. I turned around to see what it was. An electronic notice had just popped up. The email alert on my computer screen was flashing, grabbing my attention. I plopped down in the chair and swiped the mouse to wake up the monitor. As I looked at the screen, I realized how much computers had changed since I'd last used one. The old hard drives were basically extinct now. Even the solid-state drives that replaced them were outdated. Now everyone used something called MRM. It was super fast and made everything else seem slow. Something amazing just happened. My computer was super fast now. As soon as I opened my email, all the messages popped up instantly. They were in order from newest to oldest. And guess who sent the latest one? It was Jill. He's an axe warrior who runs a general store in Algade, which is the main town on the 50th floor of Aincrad. I met up with him in Tokyo just 3 weeks before. We exchanged email addresses back then, but this was the first time I'd actually heard from him. The message was simple, it just said "look at this" in the subject line. When I opened it, I found that he hadn't written a single word inside. All there was a picture attached to the email. My curiosity kicked in, so I clicked on the picture to take a closer look. I jumped out of my chair and leaned in close to the screen. I had to get a better look at this weird picture. The bright colors and lighting clues told me it wasn't a real photo, but a snapshot from a virtual world made up of polygons. In the front of the image, I saw some blurry golden bars that were hard to make out. Behind them I spotted a white table and chair standing out clearly. A woman sat in a chair wearing a white dress that was so bright, it almost glowed. As I caught a glimpse of her from the side, my eyes widened in surprise. She looked just like someone I knew. The picture was fuzzy and seemed to be zoomed in from something much bigger, but there was no mistaking that long, chestnut-colored hair. It was unmistakable. She sat with her hands clasped together on the table, her face a picture of sadness, but then I noticed something weird. She had wings growing out of her back. They were see-through and almost invisible, but they were definitely there. I quickly grabbed my phone from the desk and started scrolling through my contacts. I was getting impatient, as I waited for someone to answer. The seconds ticked by, and all I could hear was the annoying dial tone. It felt like forever before anyone picked up. I clicked the phone and suddenly heard Agil's deep voice. "Hell," he started to say, but then I burst in. "What is this picture?" Agil sounded a bit annoyed. "Normally it's good manners to say who's calling first." "Kirito," he said, but I didn't have time for that. "No time. Just tell me," I urged him. Agil sighed and said, "Look, it's a long story. Can you come to my place?" I didn't hesitate. "I'll be there. I'm leaving now." Then I hung up the phone without waiting to hear what he had to say next. I quickly grabbed my clothes and got ready to go. I jumped out of the shower and grabbed my shoes, hopping on my bike with my hair still dripping wet. The ride to the train station felt like it was taking forever. My destination was Agil's Cafe and Bar, tucked away in a crowded alley in Tokyo's Okachi neighborhood. The place was easy to miss us. Storefront was made of dark, dirty wood, and the only sign that it was even open for business was a small metal plate above the door. As I walked into the Dicey Cafe, a cool sign shaped like two giant dice caught my eye. The door creaked open and a dry chime rang out. Behind the counter stood a big bald guy with a friendly smile. He looked up and greeted me as I entered. The cafe was totally empty, not a single other customer in sight. "Hey, that was quick," he said with a grin. I replied, "This place is just as empty as it was last time I came in." I couldn't believe the place was still open after 2 whole years. My friend joked, "Shut up, we get a lot of customers at night." We were teasing each other like we used to in our old lives. I had tried to contact my friend Agil about a month ago. Luckily, someone from the Ministry of Internal Affairs helped me out. They gave me a list of names and addresses of friends I knew from the game. Lots of players probably wanted to team up with Klein, Nishida, Silica, and Lisbeth again. But I thought it would be better to give them some space before reaching out. I had mentioned this idea when I first visited Agil, and he joked, "So, you don't think I deserve the same consideration?" It made sense when I found out that Agil, whose real name is Andrew Gilbert Mills, also runs a business in the real world. Imagine a guy who's African American, but also super familiar with Tokyo. He was born and raised there, just like his parents. When he turned 25, he decided to open up his own cafe and bar in the neighborhood of Okachi, where everyone knew him. Things were going great. He had lots of regular customers and a beautiful wife to share it all with. It seemed like his business was about to take off, but then disaster struck. He got trapped in this crazy online game called Sword Art Online. After being away for 2 years, he came back to a surprise. He thought his business would be gone, but his wife had worked hard to keep it running. This story really touched my heart. The place was special. with lots of regular customers who kept coming back. The wooden decorations were polished and shiny, and the inside was cozy and comfy. There were only 4 small tables and a counter, which made it feel like a warm hug. I sat down on a stool with a soft leather seat, and ordered a coffee right away. Then I dove into what was on my mind. What did that mean? I asked. But he just didn't say anything. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small rectangular package. He slid it over to me and I caught it with my finger. The package was tiny, fitting perfectly in the palm of my hand. It looked just like a video game box. I checked the cover for a platform logo. But instead I saw something Numo logo in the upper right corner that said ASCII. I had never seen this before. Never heard of this console. I said. The person smiled and replied. That's because the ASCII was released while we were away on the other side. Jill filled me in on the details, but I was still wary. My eyes were fixed on the logo of 2 connected rings. The nerve gear had left a bad taste in everyone's mouth after all the trouble it caused. People thought it was like a monster that trapped people and wouldn't let them go, but even with all the negative buzz, it seemed some gamers still wanted to play virtual reality games where they could totally immerse themselves in the action. Just 6 months after the ASCII incident, a new company came out with its own version of the technology. They promised it was safer this time, and it quickly became a huge hit. The ASCII was everywhere, and traditional gaming consoles started to fade away. Lots of games similar to ASCII were released for the ASCII, which helped make it so popular. It all made sense, but I wasn't in a hurry to learn more about it. I didn't want to go through that again. So this is just another virtual reality game. I picked up the case and took a closer look. The cover was really cool. It showed a huge full moon rising over a super dark forest. 2 figures, a boy and a girl, were sliced into the picture, swords in hand, flying across the bright yellow moon. They wore cool fantasy clothes, and huge, see-through wings stuck out from their backs. On the cover, a fancy logo caught their eye. Alf Hiem Online. Alf Hiem Online. What's that all about? Someone asked. You pronounce it more like Alfheim. Another person explained. It means land of the fairies. Fairies? Sounds like a chill game. Actually, it's not. This game is totally intense. Jill handed me a steaming cup and flashed a grin. It's actually pretty hardcore, he said. I picked up the cup and took a deep breath, smelling the aroma before asking him to explain. What makes it so hardcore? Jill's eyes sparkled with excitement. It's all about skill, he said. The better you are, the more you'll be rewarded. And get this, player killing is actually encouraged. I raised an eyebrow, curious. So what does that mean? I asked. Jill leaned in, his voice filled with enthusiasm. You don't level up like in other games. Instead, your skills get stronger as you use them. And here's the cool part. Your health points barely increase as you play. It all comes down to how good you are at battling. Your athletic ability is what matters most. Imagine a virtual world with magic. But no swords. The graphics and animation are almost as cool as those in the popular game, SAOO. I let out a silent whistle, impressed. There's this amazing floating castle called Enkrad, created by a genius named Akihiko Kayaba. He was totally obsessed with making it perfect. It's hard to believe someone else could make a virtual world that's just as awesome. So how does the game get people to fight each other? Well, when you start playing, you get to choose what kind of fairy you want to be. And here's the thing, you're allowed to attack and kill other types of fairies. It sounds pretty intense,